Jake Morrison walked through the sliding doors of the xenobiology classroom. His boots made small thuds on the metal floor even though he tried to walk quietly. The sound seemed loud in the quiet room. 20 alien students turned to look at him. Their eyes were wide with what looked like fear. The classroom was on the Galactic Education Station. This was a huge space station that orbited around 3 different star systems. Students from all over the galaxy came here to learn. Jake was the first human to ever take this class. Professor Veltar stood at the front of the room. She was tall and made of what looked like living crystal. Her body sparkled blue and green under the lights. When she moved, tiny musical sounds came from her crystal skin. She nodded at Jake and pointed to an empty seat. Jake sat down carefully. The chair was made for beings much smaller than humans. He had to fold his legs up to fit. The alien students kept staring at him. Some of them moved their chairs away from his desk. Next to Jake sat a small creature called Zix. Zix was a Quillen. His people looked like small birds covered in soft feathers. But these feathers could change color based on how Zix felt. Right now they were pale yellow, which meant he was scared. Zix's hands shook as he held his datapad. On the other side of the room sat 2 blue-scaled creatures. They were Vorthan twins named Kep and Lep. Their people lived underground and had hard scales to protect them from cave predators. The twins whispered to each other in their clicking language. They kept looking at Jake and clicking faster. Near the back sat a plant-like being called Frex. The Phyroxians were peaceful people who got energy from light. Frex had green skin with leaf patterns and small flowers growing from his head. He was very still and quiet. His people did not like violence of any kind. Professor Veltar began her lesson. She talked about how different species had evolved to survive on their home worlds. Her voice was like music when she spoke. The crystal beings had beautiful voices that sounded like singing. Today we will discuss predator and prey relationships, she said. Each species has developed unique ways to survive. The Quillens developed speed and camouflage. The Vorthans grew protective scales and learned to hide underground. The Phyroxians became peaceful and learned to need very little to survive. Jake took notes on his datapad. He wrote down everything the professor said. His fingers moved quickly over the screen. The alien students watched him write. They seemed surprised that he was so calm and focused. "What about humans?" asked one of the Vorthan twins. "How did they evolve to survive?" All eyes turned to Jake. He looked up from his notes. 20 alien faces stared at him with fear and curiosity. Jake cleared his throat. "Well," he said slowly, "humans developed persistence, hunting, and tool use. We learned to work together and share knowledge. We also learned to adapt to many different environments." The aliens looked confused. These seemed like simple abilities. How could such basic traits make humans the most feared species in the galaxy? Zix raised his small feathered hand. "But what about the dangerous animals on Earth?" he asked. His voice was very quiet and shaky. "We have heard stories about creatures called bears and sharks and wolves," Jake smiled. "Oh yes, we have those. Bears are pretty common where I grew up. Sharks live in our oceans. Wolves live in the forests. There are also mountain lions and crocodiles and many other predators." The alien students made sounds of horror. Zix's feathers turned bright red with fear. The Vorthan twins clicked so fast it sounded like machine gun fire. Even peaceful Frex swayed back and forth in distress. "You lived near these monsters?" Kep asked in shock. "They are not monsters," Jake said calmly. "They are just animals trying to survive like everyone else. Most of them avoid humans. We learn to understand their behavior and respect their space." Professor Veltar watched this exchange with great interest. She had never seen alien students react this way to such casual discussion of predators. "Tell us more about these Earth animals," she said. Jake thought for a moment. "Well, bears are large omnivores. They eat plants and meat. They are usually not aggressive unless they feel threatened or are protecting their young. Sharks are fish that live in the ocean. Most species are not dangerous to humans. They prefer to eat fish and seals." "You swim in water with sharks?" Lep asked in horror. "Sometimes," Jake said. But shark attacks are very rare. You are more likely to be struck by lightning than attacked by a shark. Most sharks are actually quite small and harmless." The alien students could not believe what they were hearing. On their worlds, any predator was considered extremely dangerous. The idea of living alongside multiple predator species seemed impossible. "What about the wolves?" Frex asked. His flowers were drooping with worry. "Wolves are very intelligent pack hunters," Jake explained. "They hunt deer and elk mostly. They rarely attack humans. In fact, thousands of years ago, humans learned to work with wolves. We domesticated them and they became dogs. Now dogs are our companions and friends." This was too much for the alien students. They had never heard of prey species becoming friends with predators. It went against everything they knew about survival. Professor Veltar decided to move on with the lesson. "Let us discuss the classification system for predators," she said. "We will focus on hunting strategies and territorial behavior." As the lesson continued, Jake participated normally in discussions. He asked questions about alien predator species. He compared them to Earth animals. Each time he mentioned another Earth creature, the alien students became more amazed and frightened. When Jake casually mentioned that humans kept some predators as pets, Zix nearly fainted. When he explained that humans sometimes worked with dangerous animals in places called zoos, the Vorthan twins had to hold on to each other for support. The lesson ended with Professor Veltar giving out group assignments. Students would work in pairs to study predator and prey relationships. She looked at her list and made the assignments. "Jake Morrison will work with Zix," she announced. Zix's feathers turned completely white with terror. He looked at Jake with wide, scared eyes. Jake just smiled and gathered his notes. "Do not worry," Jake said kindly. "I will not hurt you. Humans are not actually predators. We are omnivores who learn to live peacefully with many different species." But Zix was not convinced. As the other students filed out of the classroom, he stayed in his seat. His feathers were still white with fear. Jake waited patiently. He had learned that sudden movements scared the smaller alien species. He sat quietly until Zix felt ready to leave. "We will do good work together," Jake said softly. "I promise you will be safe." Zix nodded but did not speak. He gathered his things and hurried out of the classroom. Jake followed slowly, giving the small alien plenty of space. As Jake walked through the corridors of the station, other alien students moved out of his way. They whispered to each other in their various languages. Word was spreading quickly about the human who spoke casually about living with predators. Jake sighed. He had hoped that taking advanced classes would help other species understand humans better. Instead, it seemed to make them even more afraid. He wondered if he would ever be able to make real friends among the alien students. A week passed since Jake first entered the xenobiology class. Every day he came to class, and every day the alien students watched him with fear. Zix still changed colors when Jake came near him. The Vorthan twins still clicked nervously when Jake spoke. Frex still swayed his plant-like body when Jake mentioned Earth animals. Jake tried to be friendly. He brought extra snacks from the human section of the station cafeteria. He offered to help other students with their homework. He spoke softly and moved slowly around the smaller aliens. But nothing seemed to help. They were still afraid of him. Professor Veltar noticed the tension in her classroom. She had taught many different species over the years. She had never seen students so scared of one classmate before. She decided to do something about it. On Friday morning, Professor Veltar made an announcement that changed everything. She stood at the front of the class with her crystal body sparkling more brightly than usual. This meant she was excited about something. "Students," she said in her musical voice, "next week we will begin our practical exercise. You will work with live specimens in the biolab. This is a very important part of your education." The alien students looked at each other nervously. Working with live animals was always dangerous. Even herbivores could be unpredictable when they were scared or confused. "You will work in pairs," the professor continued. "Each pair will be assigned a different predator species. You will observe their behavior and write detailed reports about their hunting strategies." Zix's feathers turned bright yellow with fear. The Vorthen twins started clicking so fast it sounded like rainfall. Frex's flowers wilted immediately. Even the toughest students in the class looked worried. "What kind of predators?" asked a student named Nyx. She was from a species called the Zentari. Her people had thick gray skin and were bigger than most other aliens. But even she sounded nervous. "Various species from different worlds," Professor Veltar replied. "The biolab has been collecting specimens for months. We have hunters from ice worlds, desert worlds, forest worlds, and ocean worlds. Each species has unique adaptations and behaviors." Jake raised his hand. "Will we be working with safety equipment?" "Of course," the professor said. "The biolab has the most advanced containment systems in the galaxy. Force fields, sonic deterrence, emergency teleportation, and medical teams standing by." The alien students relaxed a little when they heard about all the safety measures. But they were still worried. Working with live predators was dangerous no matter how many safety systems you had. Monday morning arrived too quickly for most of the students. They gathered outside the biolab doors with their equipment bags and nervous expressions. Jake arrived, carrying a simple notebook and a pen. He did not bring any special equipment. "Where is your safety gear?" Zix asked. His feathers were pale blue with worry. "I do not think I will need much," Jake said calmly. "I want to observe the animals naturally. Too much equipment might scare them." The alien students stared at him in shock. The idea of working with predators without maximum safety equipment was insane to them. The biolab doors opened with a soft hiss. Professor Veltar led the students inside. The lab was huge and filled with containment units. Each unit was a clear cube about the size of a small room. Inside each cube was a different predator species. Jake looked around with interest. In one unit was a creature that looked like a shadow with claws. It moved like smoke but left scratch marks on the walls. In another unit was something that looked like living crystal but moved like a hunting cat. It could change its body from solid to liquid and back again. The most impressive unit held a creature called a Corvan Ravager. It was about the size of a large dog but looked like a mixture of Volf and Mantis. It had 6 legs ending in razor-sharp claws. Its eyes could see in multiple directions at once. Most frightening of all, it could phase through solid matter for short periods. The alien students immediately began activating every safety protocol they could think of. They turned on force fields, set up sonic barriers, and tested emergency teleportation systems. Some students put on full environmental suits. Others activated personal shield generators. Professor Veltar read out the team assignments. Most pairs were given smaller, less dangerous predators. The shadow creature went to the 2 toughest students in the class. The crystal hunter went to a pair of students who specialized in energy-based life forms. Jake Morrison and Zix will work with the Corvan Ravager, Professor Veltar announced. The entire class went silent. The Corvan Ravager was by far the most dangerous creature in the lab. Even the professor looked concerned about this assignment. Zix's feathers turned completely white and he started shaking. "Professor," he said in a tiny voice, "perhaps there has been a mistake. I am not qualified to work with such a dangerous predator." "The assignments are final," Professor Veltar said firmly. "However, I will monitor your team very closely. At the first sign of danger, the exercise will be stopped." Jake walked over to the Corvan Ravager's containment unit. The creature immediately noticed him and moved to the wall closest to where he stood. Its multiple eyes focused on him with intense interest. It began pacing back and forth, testing the boundaries of its prison. "It knows you are there," Zix whispered. "It wants to hunt you." Jake studied the creature's movements. "I do not think it wants to hunt me," he said. "I think it is curious about me. Look at how it moves. It is not showing aggressive hunting behavior." The other students gathered around to watch. They could not believe Jake was standing so close to the containment unit. The Ravager continued pacing, occasionally pressing its claws against the barrier. When it did this, the claws would phase through the wall for a moment before becoming solid again. "It is testing for weaknesses," Nyx observed. "It wants to escape." All caged animals want to escape, Jake said. That does not make them evil, it just makes them wild. Professor Veltar activated the research protocols. Students, you have 4 hours to observe your assigned predators. Take detailed notes about their behavior, hunting strategies, and territorial displays. Remember, these are live specimens. They are unpredictable and dangerous. The other teams began working immediately. They stayed as far away from their assigned predators as possible. They used remote cameras and sensors to gather data. They spoke in whispers so they would not attract attention. Jake did something completely different. He sat down on the floor in front of the Corvan Ravager's containment unit. He took out his simple notebook and began writing. The creature stopped pacing and watched him with all of its eyes. "What are you doing?" Zix asked in horror. "Taking notes," Jake replied calmly. "I want to understand how it behaves when it is not being threatened." The Ravager tilted its head and made a soft chirping sound. This was not a sound any of the students had heard before. It sounded almost like curiosity rather than aggression. "Did you hear that?" Jake asked Zix. "I think it is trying to communicate." Zix was too terrified to answer. He stood frozen behind a safety barrier, watching his human partner sit calmly in front of one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators. Jake continued sitting in front of the Corvan Ravager's containment unit. The creature had stopped pacing and was now watching him with all 6 of its eyes. It made small chirping sounds and tilted its head from side to side. This was not the behavior anyone expected from such a dangerous predator. The other students were working with their assigned creatures from safe distances. They used long-range sensors and remote cameras to observe their predators. Every few minutes, someone would activate an additional safety protocol. The lab was filled with the humming of force fields and the beeping of warning systems. Zix stood behind a protective barrier, about 10 feet away from Jake. His feathers were still white with terror, but he was trying to be brave. He held his data pad with shaking hands and tried to take notes about what Jake was doing. "The Ravager appears to be responding to the human's presence," Zix whispered into his recorder. "It has stopped aggressive pacing and is making vocalizations that do not match known hunting behaviors." Professor Veltar moved closer to monitor Jake's work. She was concerned about the human's casual approach to such a dangerous assignment. The Corvan Ravager was known throughout the galaxy as an apex predator. It could hunt prey much larger than itself and had never been successfully tamed by any species. "Student Morrison," she said in her musical voice, "perhaps you should increase the distance between yourself and the specimen. The creature appears to be focusing on you intensely." Jake looked up from his notebook. "I think it is just curious about me," he said. "It has not shown any aggressive displays since I sat down. Look at its body language." The professor studied the Ravager more carefully. Jake was right. The creature's posture had changed. Its shoulders were no longer raised in hunting position. Its claws were not extended. Its tail was not lashing back and forth. These were all signs of a relaxed predator. "How do you know about predator body language?" Professor Veltar asked. "My mother is a veterinarian," Jake explained. "I grew up helping her with wild animals. You learn to read their signals so you know when they are scared, angry, or just curious." The Ravager made another chirping sound and pressed its face against the containment barrier. Its eyes were still focused on Jake, but they seemed softer now. Less like a hunter studying prey and more like an intelligent creature trying to understand something new. "It wants to interact with you," Zix observed. His voice was still shaky, but he was becoming more interested in what was happening. "I think, so too," Jake said. He slowly stood up and moved closer to the containment unit. The Ravager followed his movements but did not show any signs of aggression. "Student Morrison," Professor Veltar said urgently, "I must advise against closer contact with the specimen. The containment barriers are designed to prevent escape, not to allow interaction." Jake nodded but continued moving closer. "I understand the risks, Professor. But I think this creature is more intelligent than the reports suggest. It is trying to communicate with me." The entire class had stopped working on their own assignments. All 20 alien students were watching Jake approach the most dangerous predator in the lab. Some of them were too scared to look directly. Others were recording everything on their datapads. Jake reached the containment barrier and placed his palm against the clear wall. The Ravager immediately moved to the same spot and pressed its own front paw against the barrier from the inside. They were separated by only a few inches of advanced containment technology. "Incredible," Professor Veltar whispered. "I have never seen a Corvan Ravager show such calm behavior around any other species." The Ravager made a new sound. It was deeper than the chirping and seemed almost like a purr. It kept its paw pressed against the barrier and looked directly into Jake's eyes. The human and the predator stayed like this for several long minutes. "It is trying to establish a connection," Jake said softly. "This is how many Earth predators test whether something is safe. They touch first, then they decide if they want to interact more." Zix had moved closer, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear. What would happen if the barrier was not there? He asked. "I do not know," Jake admitted, "but I do not think it would attack immediately. It is showing signs of curiosity, not aggression." Professor Veltar was faced with a difficult decision. What Jake was suggesting was extremely dangerous, but his observations were providing valuable scientific data. The Ravager was behaving in ways that had never been documented before. "Student Morrison," she said carefully, "are you suggesting that we lower the containment barrier?" The entire class gasped. Several students made sounds of horror. The Vorthan twins started clicking so fast it sounded like an alarm. Even Toughnicks backed away from the containment area. "I am not suggesting anything," Jake said calmly. "I am just observing what I see. This creature is intelligent and curious. It is not showing hunting behavior. It is showing social behavior." The Ravager seemed to sense the tension in the room. It looked around at all the frightened alien students, then back at Jake. It made a soft whining sound and pressed both front paws against the barrier. "It can sense their fear," Jake observed. "That is making it nervous too. Predators often become aggressive when they sense fear because fear usually means danger." Professor Veltar made a decision that would change everything. "Student Morrison, I am going to lower the barrier for exactly 60 seconds. You will have emergency teleportation locked onto your position. If the creature shows any signs of aggression, you will be removed immediately." "Professor, no," Zix cried out. "It is too dangerous." "This is a learning opportunity," Professor Veltar said firmly. "We may never have another chance to observe this kind of interaction. All safety protocols will be active." Jake nodded and stepped back from the containment unit. The Ravager watched him move and made questioning sounds. It seemed to understand that something was about to change. The containment barrier flickered and disappeared. For the first time, there was nothing between Jake and the Corvan Ravager except empty air. The creature could now reach him with its razor-sharp claws. It could phase through any physical barrier Jake might try to put up. The alien students held their breath. Several of them activated personal shields. Others moved behind additional barriers. Zix was shaking so hard his feathers were making rustling sounds. The Ravager stepped forward cautiously. It was free to move beyond its containment area for the first time in months. It looked around the lab, then focused on Jake again. The human stood perfectly still, waiting to see what the creature would do. The Ravager approached slowly. It stretched out its neck and sniffed the air around Jake. It could smell his scent and the scents of all the terrified aliens in the room. Its eyes never left Jake's face. Then the creature did something that amazed everyone. It sat down in front of Jake like a giant dog. It was still alert and ready to move quickly if needed. But it was not attacking. It was waiting to see what Jake would do next. "Hello there," Jake said softly. "You are a beautiful creature." The Ravager tilted its head and made a soft chirping sound. It seemed to like the sound of Jake's voice. For the first time since being captured, the dangerous predator looked almost peaceful. Jake stood perfectly still as the Corvan Ravager sat in front of him. The creature was close enough that he could see the patterns on its scales and the way its multiple eyes moved independently. It was breathing calmly and its body was relaxed. This was not the behavior of a predator about to attack. The alien students watched in amazement as Jake slowly reached out his hand toward the Ravager. His movement was so slow that it took almost a minute for his hand to travel the distance. The creature watched his hand approach but did not move away or show any signs of fear. "What are you doing?" Zix whispered. His voice was barely audible, but Jake heard him. "I am letting it know that I am not a threat," Jake said quietly. Slow movements show peaceful intentions. Fast movements trigger hunting instincts. The Ravager sniffed Jake's hand when it came close enough. Its breath was warm against his skin. The creature's nose was wet and soft, much like a dog's nose. After a moment, it gently touched Jake's palm with the tip of its snout. "Contact established," Professor Valtar announced. Her voice was filled with wonder. "This is the first recorded peaceful contact between a Corvan Ravager and any other species." Jake began to explain what he was doing while he continued his slow interaction with the creature. On Earth, humans learned to live alongside many predator species. We discovered that most predators are not naturally aggressive toward creatures that are not prey or threats. The Ravager made a soft rumbling sound and moved slightly closer to Jake. It was now close enough that Jake could feel the warmth from its body. The creature's 6 legs were positioned in a relaxed stance, not in hunting posture. "But how did you know it would not attack?" asked Nyx. She had moved closer to get a better view, but was still behind a safety barrier. "I did not know for certain," Jake admitted, "but I could read its body language. When a predator is preparing to attack, it shows specific signs. Raised shoulders, extended claws, focused stare, tense muscles. This creature was not showing any of those signs." The Ravager settled down into a lying position, similar to how a cat might lie down. Its eyes remained alert, but its body was completely relaxed. It continued to watch Jake with what seemed like curiosity rather than hunger. "In my world, we have creatures called wolves," Jake continued. "They are pack hunters with sharp teeth and claws. Thousands of years ago, some humans learned to communicate with wolves. They discovered that wolves could become partners instead of enemies." The alien students could not believe what they were hearing. The idea of prey species becoming partners with predators was completely foreign to their understanding of nature. "How is that possible?" Frex asked. His plant-like body was swaying with confusion. "Predators exist to hunt prey." "That is the natural order. That is true," Jake said. "But intelligent predators can learn to distinguish between different types of creatures. They can learn that some creatures are neither prey nor threats. They can learn that some creatures might be useful partners." The Ravager seemed to be listening to Jake's voice. It made small sounds in response to his words, almost like it was trying to participate in the conversation. Its tail moved in a gentle swaying motion that seemed to indicate contentment. What did humans offer to wolves that made them willing to become partners? Professor Valtar asked. She was taking detailed notes on her datapad while keeping the emergency systems ready. "Food, shelter, protection, and companionship," Jake replied. "Wolves are social animals. They understand cooperation and mutual benefit. Humans provided reliable food sources and safe places to rest. In return, wolves used their hunting skills to help humans and their senses to warn of danger." The Ravager stood up and walked in a small circle around Jake. It was investigating his scent and getting used to his presence. Jake remained still and calm, letting the creature explore at its own pace. "This creature is doing something similar," Jake observed. "It is learning about me. It is deciding whether I am safe to be around. It is not trying to hunt me or defend territory from me. It is trying to understand what I am." Zix had become completely fascinated by what he was seeing. His feathers had changed from white fear to blue curiosity. What other Earth animals did humans become partners with? "Many species," Jake said. "Horses helped us travel long distances. Cats helped us control pests. Dogs became our closest companions. Some humans even learned to work with birds of prey for hunting." The Ravager returned to its position in front of Jake and sat down again. This time it moved closer, close enough that Jake could have reached out and touched its head. The creature seemed to be inviting interaction. It trusts you, Zix said. In amazement, a Corvan Ravager trusts a human. Trust is not the right word, Jake corrected. It has decided that I am not dangerous to it. It is curious about me. It might even be lonely after being in captivity for so long. Professor Valtar was watching the time carefully. You have 30 more seconds before I must reactivate the containment barrier, she announced. Jake nodded and began to slowly back away from the Ravager. I need to move away now, he said to the creature in a calm voice. But I am not leaving. Because you are dangerous. I am leaving because the other people here are scared. The Ravager watched Jake move away but did not follow him. It seemed to understand that their interaction was ending. It made a soft whining sound that almost sounded like sadness. It does not want you to leave, Zix observed. Predators can form social bonds just like any other intelligent species, Jake explained. This creature has been alone for months. It wants companionship. The containment barrier flickered back into place. The Ravager was once again trapped in its clear cube, but its behavior had completely changed. It was no longer pacing or testing for weaknesses. It was lying down in a relaxed position, occasionally looking toward Jake with what seemed like hope. Incredible, Professor Veltar said. In 60 seconds, you have gathered more behavioral data about Corvan Ravagers than scientists have collected in 50 years of study. The other students began asking questions all at once. They wanted to know more about human interactions with predators. They wanted to understand how Jake had known what to do. They wanted to know if the same techniques would work with other species. The key is understanding behavior, Jake explained. Every species has evolved different ways to communicate threat, submission, curiosity, and friendliness. If you can learn to read these signals, you can communicate back. The Ravager made one final sound from inside its containment unit. It was a soft chirping noise directed at Jake. The human smiled and made a similar sound back. The creature's eyes seemed to brighten in response. You just spoke to it, Zix said in wonder. I tried to, Jake replied. I think it understood. The weeks following the biolab exercise changed everything in Professor Veltar's class. Jake had completed more behavioral observations of the Corvan Ravager in one session than previous researchers had managed in years. His notes contained detailed descriptions of the creature's social behaviors, communication attempts, and problem-solving abilities. The alien students no longer avoided Jake in the hallways. Instead, they sought him out with questions about Earth, animals, and human survival techniques. Zix had become particularly interested in learning about predator behavior. His fear had transformed into scientific curiosity. Tell us about the wolves again, Zix said during one of their study sessions. How did the first humans know they could become partners with such dangerous creatures? Jake smiled as he explained. It probably started with wounded or orphaned wolf pups. Humans have a natural tendency to help injured animals. Some humans might have rescued wolf babies and raised them. These wolves would have grown up seeing humans as family rather than enemies. The Vorthan twins clicked with interest. So the partnership began with compassion, not conquest, Kep observed. Exactly, Jake said. Humans did not defeat wolves or force them to obey. We found ways to work together that benefited both species. The wolves got reliable food and protection. Humans got help with hunting and warning of danger. Frex swayed thoughtfully. This is very different from how we understood humans. He sighed. We were told that humans were the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. We thought you conquered other species through violence. Some humans have done terrible things, Jake admitted. But most humans throughout history have tried to live in balance with other species. We learned that cooperation is usually more successful than conflict. Professor Veltar had been listening to these discussions with growing interest. The humans' presence in her class had revealed something important about the nature of predator relationships. She decided it was time to share a secret she had been keeping. Students, she announced one day, I have something important to tell you about our recent biolab exercise. The class turned to look at her. Her crystal body was sparkling brightly, which meant she was excited or nervous about something. The exercise was not a normal part of the curriculum, she continued. It was designed specifically to observe how human Morrison would interact with dangerous predators. The Galactic Academic Council has been debating the true nature of human behavior. For years? Jake looked surprised. You mean this was a test? In a way, yes, Professor Veltar said. There are two theories about why humans are feared throughout the galaxy. The first theory is that humans are naturally violent and aggressive. The second theory is that humans understand violence so well that they can control it. The alien. Students looked at each other in confusion. These theories seem very different. Your demonstration with the Corvan Ravager proved that the second theory is correct, Professor Veltar explained. Humans are not feared because they are violent. They are feared because they can communicate with violence and make it unnecessary. Jake thought about this for a moment. I suppose that makes sense. On Earth, the most dangerous humans are often the calmest ones. They understand conflict so well that they can avoid it or end it quickly. Exactly, Professor Veltar said. Other species see humans as dangerous because you can work with predators. You can understand their behavior and predict their actions. This makes you unpredictable to species that only know how to run from predators or fight them. Zix's feathers turned bright green with understanding. So when Jake worked with the Ravager, he was not being brave or reckless. He was using knowledge that humans developed over thousands of years. That is correct, Professor Veltar said. Humans evolved on a world with many predator species. You had to learn to understand them or you would not have survived. This understanding became part of your nature. The revelation changed how all the students viewed Jake. He was no longer a terrifying Deathworlder. He was a representative of a species that had learned to be the mediator between predator and prey. What about other human abilities? Nix asked. We have heard that humans can survive in almost any environment. Is that also related to your understanding of predators? Jake nodded. Humans are very adaptable. We learn to live in hot deserts, cold mountains, deep forests, and open plains. Each environment had different predators and different challenges. We had to be flexible to survive. Over the following days, the students began to understand more about human psychology. Jake explained how humans use tools not just to hunt, but to solve problems and help other species. He talked about human medicine, which was used to heal both humans and animals. He described human agriculture, which was designed to work with natural systems rather than against them. Humans see themselves as part of nature, not separate from it, Jake explained. We learned that helping other species usually helps us. 2. If we take care of the environment takes care of us. The class began working on a final project together. Instead of individual reports, they decided to create a comprehensive study of human-predator relationships. Each student contributed research about their own species' interactions with predators, and Jake provided information about human techniques. Zix had become particularly skilled at reading predator body language. He could now identify signs of aggression, curiosity, fear, and contentment in various species. The Vorthan twins learned about cooperative hunting strategies that humans used with Volf partners. Frex studied how humans used agriculture to create environments that supported both predators and prey. The final presentation was attended by professors from across the galaxy. When they saw Aquilin calmly discussing predator behavior and a Phyroxian explaining cooperative hunting strategies, they realized that Jake had accomplished something remarkable. You have done more than complete an assignment, Professor Veltar told the class. You have built bridges between species that have been afraid of each other for centuries. Jake smiled at his classmates. I think you all just needed to understand that predators are not monsters. They are just animals trying to survive like everyone else. When you understand their behavior, you can predict their actions. When you can predict their actions, you can work with them safely. As the semester ended, Jake received invitations to study at universities throughout the galaxy, but he decided to stay at the Galactic Education Station. He wanted to continue working with Professor Veltar to develop new ways for different species to understand each other. The biolab kept the Corvin Ravager as a permanent resident. It had become used to interacting with Jake and other students. It was no longer seen as just a dangerous predator, but as an intelligent creature capable of forming relationships. Jake often visited the Ravager between classes. The creature would always move to the edge of its containment unit when it saw him coming. It would make soft chirping sounds and press its face against the barrier. Sometimes Jake would sit nearby and talk to it while doing homework. "You know," Jake said to the Ravager one day, "I think you understand more than anyone realizes. Maybe someday we can work together to help other species understand that predators and prey do not have to be enemies." The Ravager made a sound that almost seemed like agreement. It settled down in its favorite spot near the barrier and watched Jake with intelligent eyes. In that moment, both human and predator seemed to understand that they had started something important. They had shown the galaxy that communication was possible between any two species willing to try.